Welcome to the broadcast, my dears. All the talk here in the kingdom is of politics. So for those of you outside the kingdom who might not understand, our Prime Minister Rishi Sunak announced a general election, a snap election, that is going to take place in 6 weeks' time on July the 4th. So we're going to have 6 weeks of aggressive campaigning coming from all sides now. The likelihood is that the opposition will go on to win the general election. This is the assumption. Labour, led by the rather charmless Keir Starmer. But then I've always thought that Rishi Sunak lacked charisma and any sort of appeal whatsoever. But we are going to see some aggressive campaigning coming up. And something that I've learned over the last few years is how things can change in an instant and in a second. And what looks very likely one moment becomes completely muddy the next. And everything can turn on its head, but of course the likelihood is that we are going to have a Labour government for the next 5 years. Yippity-doo-dah. One thing that is apparent, and by the way I should mention that of course our Prime Minister had to take the steps of requesting permission from our head of state to dissolve Parliament before he made this announcement.
Earlier today, I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament. The King has granted this request, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
But one thing that became clear today, because we've been following this in previous broadcasts, regular viewers will know, is that Mr Farage, our dear Nigel, has declared that he will not be standing as the leader of the Reform Party, which will be a great disappointment to many, including, I've got to say, to me. The dramatic side of me was hoping that he would announce and stand as leader for Reform, which would have really shaken both parties, both of the other main parties to their core. But it emerges that he has a 6-year plan for Reform before he takes a hold of it, and the word is that he will be vying for the role of Prime Minister in the 2029 election. So it looks like he's aiming for a sort of long-term goal here. And also he is going to be making big bucks with the very lucrative appearances that he'll be making on behalf of Donald Trump over the next few months in advance of the American election. He's going to be there lobbying and appearing at rallies and getting paid real money, which will be hard for him to resist. So what I can tell you, and what I've mentioned before, is the fact that I, for one, will certainly not be rewarding the Tories with my vote. I will certainly not be doing so, because they've let us down so very terribly. And I certainly won't be voting for Mr Starmer, although personally I happen to know and think that he is a rather nice bloke. In some respects, he goes to my local boozer, one of my favourite local boozers, the Pineapple, and I happen to know his yard extremely well, and Countess Road and all the surrounding areas of Kentish Town, which, as I mentioned before, is very close to my heart, and he's a Kentish Town. So I've got perhaps a soft spot for him as a person, but not especially for his politics. And also he is a cohort of Owen Jones. I mean, heaven forbid, and heavens to Betsy. No, thank you. But the announcement was an embarrassingly rain-sodden affair here in the kingdom. I mean, it was farcical. One could say comical, but actually I didn't find it really that funny. I just despaired. I absolutely despaired of the vision of this sodden Prime Minister, not an umbrella in sight, being drowned out by protesters, deeply uncharismatic as he is. And it was always arrogant of him and his supporters to muscle him in. They muscled him in when members of the Tory party actually would have preferred somebody further right, not these Labour-light Conservative ministers that we seem to have these days, with nobody understanding conservatism either with a small or a large C. It is no longer a Conservative party, which is why so many of us have been attracted to the appeal of the words of the Reform Party, and might be a little bit disappointed that Mr Farage isn't going to swoop in and do his bit this month. Might have to hold our patience and wait for that. But of course then Liz Truss was voted into leadership. That wasn't good enough, and there was so much Machiavellian behaviour coming from the Tories that he muscled and oiled his way in there, did Rishi Sunak. And as you might recall, I wasn't best pleased for many months, but then I turned a corner and began to at least give him a chance, because it felt like a grown-up was back in the room, because we've had this childish Western charade of antics going on for the last few years, coming up for 10 years, I suppose, of tantrums and, names hurled at each other and petty abuses in a style that is not becoming. It's not grown up, and it's rather undesirable. So I was pleased to have some sort of maturity back in the room, but we are still left with a country after 14 years of Tory leadership that is sliding down into despair, and much of that is due to the wokery going on in government, and it should have been halted. It should have been halted when the signal came along 5 years ago and a vast majority voted Boris Johnson into power. He wasted his majority, and that is why one of the many reasons why I will certainly not be rewarding them with a vote. This whole appearance this week by Rishi was a symbol of this 14 years of decline. It was a damp squib. It was a damp squib of a day and a damp squib of 14 years of this Tory government. And I certainly don't think that a Labour government would have done any better. But even if we are going to now be led by Keir Starmer's Labour government for the next 5 years, as much as it fills me with despair, despite having many friends and loved ones, including politicians and including names that you all know among people that I adore and love. So I have no disparagement for Labour voters, Labour enthusiasts. It's just not my personal cup of tea. But despite all of that, I would prefer actually that they win over the Tories, because the Tories have disgraced themselves and do not deserve to be rewarded. So it's about choosing between a rock and a hard place at the moment, but I will be voting for the party, the only party, that is speaking out on issues that I care about and that I'm worried about, and has no time for wokery or indulging virtue signalling and critical race theory and all of this absolute balderdash. And you can use your imagination to try and figure out who that will be. But it ain't the Tories, it ain't Labour, it ain't the Greens, it ain't the Liberals, and it ain't the monster raving loony party either. So go figure. And there was another soggy washout, I'm afraid, my dears. There was another soggy washout for Prince William's first garden party of the year, without the Princess of Wales at his side. And sometimes I think the photographs and the video footage you see of these garden party events don't make it clear how many people there are in attendance. It's not really an intimate gathering. There are usually about 8,000 people, thousands of people at these gatherings, so it's more like some sort of event at an arena. And I'll be interested to hear from you if you've been to a garden party, what you thought of it, if you enjoyed it, who you managed to meet. But I have heard that it can sometimes be a bit of an anticlimax, because sometimes people don't get a glimpse. In fact, most of the crowd don't really get a glimpse of royalty, and they can only bring one guest along. So you need the clement weather really to bring some joy and uplift the spirits usually. But on this occasion they still seem to manage to have a lot of fun, and the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester were there at William's side to help out, as were Mr. and Mrs. Mike Tyndall, who put on a good show, and the York gals had been deployed. Deploy, Beatrice. Deploy, usually. They'd been deployed to do the King's bidding. And actually, all of the ladies looked ravishing. I thoroughly approved. The colourways that were adorning the princesses Beatrice and Eugenie were splendid. Beatrice wore this crimson Christina dress by Beulah and an Idun headband by Emily, and Eugenie was in a ruffled dress by Ulla Johnson, and metallic silver rock stud leather heels by Valentino, and an Alice Archer Bloom headpiece also by Emily. And Zara was gorgeous. I think we've seen her in this confection before, but isn't it divine? This Laura Green Isabel dress with beautiful buttons, and a boater by Sarah Cant. But those poor suede heels, oh, I did feel sorry for her. These are the Rebecca pumps, and the colour is called makeup, but in this instance they rather resemble tear-stained mascara, so perhaps they'll have to invent that as a new colourway. The Prince of Wales looks wonderful in a topper, doesn't he? So he was in his element, in his topper and morning suit, and he met with tenants from his duchy of Cornwall, tenant farmers and guests, all from his patronages, members of the military and his homelessness project, Homewards, and Peter Phillips was in attendance providing eye candy, and Mr. Tyndall, some humour. 'Twas Mary Poppins meets my fair lady, with umbrellas of a diverse array and waterproof cagoules. A stark contrast to the sunny gatherings we saw last week in the garden, but at the very least it was quintessentially British. Everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves immensely. Now, the painting. The painting. Wait for it. Librarian's wife says, can't wait to hear what you think about the latest portrait of Kate. Thank you, librarian's wife. And my opinion and my thoughts might not be what people expect. As soon as I saw this painting pop up, I could hear the objections in my head. I just knew what was coming. I knew there was going to be a cavalcade of abuse for this poor artist, Hannah Uzur, because this portrait was unveiled on the July cover of Tatler. A portrait of strength and dignity. Hannah Uzur is a British Zambian artist, and we recognise instantly, don't we, that iconic look of the Packham gown, the Jenny Packham gown, paired with the Strathmore Rose tiara. That's instantly recognisable. But something else about the picture didn't ring quite as many bells. And this is not an official portrait, by the way, not in the same manner as the recently unveiled portrait of King Charles III, which we discussed last week, and which was also very polarising in opinion. Thank you so much, by the way, for your opinions. I asked you specifically for them, and thank you so much for providing them. Great food for thought, and so passionate you were, loving it and hating it, and giving it huge compliments, and some saying that he'd got his wish to be reincarnated as a tampon. But this isn't an official portrait. It is, however, part of a collection under the new Ekoji residency in collaboration with the King's Foundation for African, Caribbean and Diasporic Artists to take part in a residency at Dumfries House. And this portrait was following on from a portrait of Queen Elizabeth II a few years ago by a Nigerian artist, and one of King Charles III by a Trinidadian, so that puts it more in context. The artist had only 3 weeks to complete this commission for Tatler, although she said it's not a problem and she usually does paint quickly, over 2 or 3 days apparently. Now, initially I had the same reaction as some of the headlines. I thought it looks nothing like Catherine, nothing at all, and there wasn't a flicker of recognition to the face, not a flicker of recognition. I thought that it was unflattering, and I thought that she'd painted Meghan's jawline. That ain't Catherine's jawline, it's Meghan's. And you can spot that a mile off. However, I have had time for consideration, and I have had time to mellow, and I'm certainly not, by the way, going to try and persuade you to like it if you don't. If you do, you do. If you don't, you don't. It is what it is. Although I have no truck with elitism, and I believe in meritocracy of talent, I have sensed on this occasion some philistinism, should we put it that way? A little whisper of the Philistine, a little whisper of ignorance in some responses to this painting, because this is a painting by an artist, and it is not a photographic reproduction or intended to be so. It is art, and you might think it's good art or bad art, but it is not supposed to be photorealism, and the artist isn't under any sort of imperative to reproduce a facsimile. One presumes that she is free to express herself as she sees fit. And when I was reading about Hannah Uzur, I saw that she had recently graduated, very recently, from the Slade, and many of my favourite artists emerged from that academy, if you will. many of them, including one who I've mentioned several times on the broadcast because he's right up there with my favourites, and that is Craigie Aitchison, whose work sings to me very much. And I'll flash a few images of his work on the screen. He doesn't always paint people. There's a lot of landscapes and religious iconography and imagery and animals. But just for comparison, I will throw up a few faces that he's painted. And I would ask you, when you look at his work, would his subjects have seen a mirrored version of themselves? No, I don't think so. Maybe more of a flicker of recognition, but there is a crudeness and a childlike, chalky quality, if you will, at first. Rather like the bench illustrations, even though they're a very different style, but that sort of crude childhood style, but with a sort of deeper sense of something more profound underneath it. I think that you have to take time to look at a picture, and it will often reveal itself if you do so. So that is all I'm urging here, as I did for the King Charles III portrait, which was hugely polarising. No opinion is right or wrong. And once I had gotten over the shock of the lack of facial recognition, I have seen the quiet strength and dignity of this piece, and even some beauty. The artist said that all my portraits are made up of layers of a personality, constructed from everything I can find about them. When you can't meet the sitter in person, you have to look at everything you can find and piece together the subtle human moments revealed in different photographs. And she chose the greeny blue background based on Catherine's eye colour, and also trying to get elements of being in a garden and on water, rowing being one of her favourite sports. And she said that Catherine has really risen up to her role. She was born for this. She carries herself with such dignity, elegance and grace. I sense with her the joy of motherhood. And this artist actually was the one who painted Sarah Forbes Bonetta, who we've previously discussed in a broadcast, because she went on to become the goddaughter of Queen Victoria. She was the daughter of an African ruler, and the portrait of her was unveiled at Osborne House some years ago. So whatever you think of this portrait, and without even searching for it, I saw quite a few disparaging headlines and also some wickedly nasty things being said on social media. It's fair enough if you don't like it. It's fair enough if you want to criticise it. I'm not saying that I fell in love with it on sight, and I still think that the face looks nothing like Catherine. However, there are layers to the piece. There is beauty to be found in it. Moreover, my point is that no disrespect was intended, as far as I can make out. No disrespect. And I actually find the style, which I'm struggling to find the word for, diasporic, perhaps, of the diaspora. I find it interesting and thought-provoking because it forces one to look beyond a photoreal rendition and discover what lies beyond the superficial. It's another challenge, and it gives one something to chew on. Now, this snap election that is coming up has implications for royalty, and Buckingham Palace have issued a statement saying that following the Prime Minister's statement this afternoon calling a general election, the royal family will, in accordance with normal procedure, postpone engagements that may appear to divert attention or distract from the election campaign. Their Majesties send their sincere apologies to any of those who may be affected as a result. And if we have a new Prime Minister in 6 weeks' time, it is going to be His Majesty's third Prime Minister already. And he hasn't even reached the 2-year mark of his reign. Already 3 in, he'll be catching up with the late Queen Liz soon, won't he? It is not yet confirmed which events might be affected by this, but we've got Tripping the Colour coming up on June the 15th. We've got Royal Ascot and all those celebrations. We've got the Japan visit, the Japanese state visit. And there are also going to be D-Day celebrations. I believe they will not be affected and will be going ahead for the 80th anniversary of D-Day. There are going to be celebrations in Portsmouth and in Normandy in June. But speaking of Trooping the Colour, Prince Edward has been rehearsing in earnest with his brother at his side. Yes, Prince Andrew has been taking him under his wing on horseback behind the scenes for Edward's debut Trooping the Colour on horseback. Of course, he's appeared before in carriage, But this time, as the new colonel of the Scots Guards, carriage won't do, my dear, so he's going to be appearing astride a horse in full military apparel and bearskin. And he's been undertaking rigorous training behind the scenes at the quadrangle at Windsor with Andrew. So at least that's given the Duke of York something to do other than walk the late Queen's corgis. The King hosted a reception at Buckingham Palace for winners of the 20th Prince's Trust Awards, and he had a giggle with Deck from Ant and Dec, and people like Tyler West, DJ Cuppy, I've never heard of these people, but Pixie Lott, that dancer from Strictly, and Artie, who is the winner of Amal Clooney's Women's Empowerment Award. One would have thought that might have gone to the Duchess of Sussex and that she'd have nabbed that one, but no, it went to our dear Artie. But there was so much gaiety, so much gaiety. The Trust Awards recognise young people who have succeeded against the odds and overcome challenges, such as poor mental health, educational troubles, youth employment, and all of these commoners have been helped by the Trust. And while His Majesty was busy with other things, Prince William oversaw a few investitures on his behalf, and notables included Lauren Hemp, a footballer who received an MBE, Dr. James Martin, receiving his MBE for services to drama in Northern Ireland, the artist Sonia Boyce. Yes, there are a few of the great and good, and we send them our congratulations. As for the Princess Royal, she's been in Norway for a few days, a 3-day visit, and she was reunited there with her godson, Crown Prince Haakon, who is first in line to the throne, and she was visiting in her role as the patron of the Anglo-Norwegian Resistance Commemoration Project. Geez, that's a mouthful. At the Resistance Museum, they unveiled a plaque together as 100-year-old war veteran Trond Johansen looked on. The plaque commemorates intelligence cooperation between our two nations during World War II, and Her Royal Highness also stepped out at the Industrial Workers' Museum and attended a reception with the British Ambassador to Norway at the British Ambassador's residence. The Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh have been on the Isle of Cole, a small Hebridean island off the west of Scotland. Doesn't it look absolutely gorgeous and very picturesque? This was the first royal visit to the Isle of Cole in 12 years, and the 6 school children, just 6 of them, sang to the Edinburghs in enchanting Gaelic, absolutely heavenly. And wasn't this gentleman there really rather handsome? Very nice indeed. This was part of their island tour, which also took in the Isle of Skye and of Tiree. So everything is ticking over, my dears, but prepare for fireworks, because we've got a roller coaster coming up here in the kingdom, and then we've got everything starting over the pond with our naughty American cousins, and everything that's going to be going on coming up towards the end of the year. Yes, we are there again. Hasn't it flown by since the last election? And now we've got another one coming up, and we know it's going to be full of drama. So I think before we get exercise, we've got to try this time, haven't we, my dears, to deal with it all with a sense of humour. I think that's got what we're going to need, and I think we should be inspired by some of our royal figures, such as the late Queen Liz, because I think she would have had a wry smile over all these proceedings. And not, although it's serious business, don't get me wrong, whether it's here in the kingdom or over in the States, very serious business going on, but one has to deal with these things with humour, doesn't one? And I really do think that when I tell you to channel the royal spirit, that absolutely includes and embraces having a fruity giggle and having some fruity humour. So let's brace ourselves and hold on to our hats or our tiaras and enjoy the ride. Thank you for your company. I'll see you next time, my dears. Leave me a lovely juicy comment, and if you enjoyed the show, my tip jar is in the description box. Take care, my dears. Channel the royal spirit and toodle pip.